Hello AP Bio class. Today in this video we're going to be going over the big world of evolution and genetics. Genetics are a big topic in biology and basically covers the origin of life, how it works, and just the general mechanics of it. It's a very fascinating aspect of biology. So with that being said, let's get started. Before we can go into the specifics of evolution and genetics, we first have to define what evolution is. The best way to describe evolution would be change. Change of characteristics, genes, behaviors. These all happen over long periods of time. For example, take the most famous example of evolution, Darwin and his finches. Now, the general idea of this is that Darwin saw that these finches were different and adapted to the environment. They had different beaks. To be specific, each finch had adapted a different beak to suit the environment for different types of seeds. This is the core fundamental idea of evolution, to evolve and adapt to the current environment. This also plays into the idea of natural selection, where the strongest and most fit creatures survive. A simple example of this is fish and their camouflage. Let's say there was a species of fish that had different camouflages to blend in with coral to hide from predators. If the coral is orange and a fish is black, it's going to stand out and it probably won't survive to pass down the trait of having black camouflage. But if a fish comes along that's orange, it probably will survive since it's the most fit of that group, and it will go on to pass down the trait of being orange. Sometimes, certain organisms in a population can undergo such change that the new individual cannot reproduce with the old species. For example, we have organism A, B, and C. If organism A gets isolated from B and C and evolves according to its environment separately, then it will evolve into something different. Then organism A will be distinct from B and C. This is the fundamental idea of speciation in species. Most often, species are made or diverge or split off when organisms in new environments, or even the same ones, evolve into separate and different species. Natural selection is a big topic in and of itself, but what you'll need to understand about is that the fundamental aspect of natural selection is competition. Competition between species for food, mates, and shelter. This leads into the concept of fitness, where individuals that have more favorable traits. This leads into the concept of fitness, where individuals that have more favorable traits for survival in certain environments are more competitive with other individuals, and therefore are more likely to survive and create offspring, and their offspring reflect their parents' genes and carry them on to make even more offspring. Fitness itself can be a big indicator of whether an individual can adapt or adjust to an environment, or if the organism is just not suitable to live in it. Now, not all populations or individuals necessarily have to evolve. When a population is not evolving or experiencing change, it is said to be in a Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now, what exactly is this equilibrium? To first understand the principle, we have to understand this situation first. We need to establish the conditions that have to be met. So, let's say you have a population of animals. In this case, we'll just say birds. These birds have certain characteristics or alleles. And let's say, in this example, our portion of birds have round beaks or have narrow beaks. Now, this example might sound a little bit familiar to another famous example that previously brought up. Anyway, the round beaks are going to be dominant to the narrow beaks. Now, we can say that the new generation, the next generation, the frequency of round beaks in the new generation would be the same as the allele frequency in the previous generation if all the genetic factors stay the same or constant. We would be avoiding things such as genetic drift, natural selection, and gene flow. Genetic drift can be described as the fluctuation of alleles among generations, and gene flow is the population losing or gaining alleles due to immigration or immigration of individuals. Now, the simplified 5 requirements for Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium are no mutation, no gene flow, large population size, random mating, and previously mentioned, no natural selection. So if these conditions are met, we can describe a population's alleles with a formula. P squared plus 2p squared plus q squared equals 1. P, in this equation, P is the frequency of the dominant allele, and Q is the frequency of the recessive allele. So now let's use it on an example problem.
Shavings? No! Savings!
You can't skip this Geico ad because it's already over. Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
We have a sampled population in which we know that the percentage of the homozygous recessive genotype to lowercase a is 36%. And we know that the population size is 100. Using that information, calculate the following. First one asks, what is the frequency of the homozygous recessive genotype? 2 small a's. Well, this one basically tells us the answer in the question. And all we really have to do is remember that recessive is represented by Q. So this means, so it tells us the frequency of the genotype is 36%, and Q squared in the Hardy-Weinberg equation represents the genotype frequency. So we know that Q squared must equal, so we know that the Q squared must equal 0.36, as stated here. The next question asks the frequency of the lowercase a allele. Now this one's slightly trickier, you have to do one step. So recall that Q without the squared represents the frequency of the allele itself, and in this case, the recessive allele. So basically, we just have to solve for Q. Now, put on your big boy AP Bio hats and let's try and solve this equation. Now, after a bit of struggle, you can probably figure out that Q equals to 0.6. Next, it asks us for the frequency of the capital A allele. Now, we're going to have to utilize an equation for this. P plus Q equals 1. So for this question, it asks us for this, the capital A, the dominant. And recall that P represents the dominant. We know the Q, we solve for the A. And this is in Regents biology, so I'm not gonna show my work. Hopefully Mr. Caputo forgives me, doesn't drop my grade. E equals 0.4. Exciting stuff. Now, for the final question, we might actually have to think a little bit. The frequency, it's asking us for the frequency of the genotypes of the homozygous dominant and heterozygous genotype. So let's do the homozygous dominant one first. So let me write down the Hardy-Weinberg equation. 2pq plus q squared equals 1. So since it asks us for the genotype, we take certain parts from this equation. First one is dominant, which is represented by this. Second one is heterozygous, represented by this. So we basically just solve for each one of these. So p squared is gonna equal to, remember that we always solve for p here, do some quick mental math, find out that p squared is gonna equal to 0.16. The next one might be a bit too tricky for some of you, but I'll take it slow. You have to multiply 3 numbers together. Take 2 times 0.4 times 0.6. And with large strain, you can deduce that the answer is 0.48. And that's your answer for the second part. So just to confirm, 0.16 is the frequency of the homozygous dominant genotype, and 0.48 is the frequency of the heterozygous genotype. And if you want to find the frequency in the population, just multiply it by population size. That's how frequency works. To conclude what we discussed today, we talked about evolution, population, and how it works. We talked about the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, what it is, and the conditions for it. And we did a, albeit basic, practice problem on finding allele frequencies and genotype frequencies of individuals in a population. Now, if I'm talking to a class in the future, AP Bio Test is easy. Bye.